Goodbye to Xochimilco. On a Sunday afternoon, the Xochimilco canals are the place to be. I should know. I grew up just an hour north of these canals in Mexico City. Some people look down on the district of Xochimilco. They think it's too working class, too down at the heels, and too tacky. Those people are missing its charm. I don't want those people at Xochimilco anyway. I can remember learning about Venice in elementary school. It blew my mind. A city halfway across the world with canals and gondoliers, just like Xochimilco. Except all of Venice is on canals. Imagine if the canals of Xochimilco swallowed up Mexico City. Our barges aren't quite gondolas, not as slender or swift, but the people who steer the barges are particularly skilled. The barges, called trajineras, are sturdy and festive, painted brightly in yellow, blue, and red. But they're difficult to maneuver, clumsy in the water. On Sunday afternoons, the canals become the site of one enormous game of bumper boats. Most of the boat's passengers are enjoying themselves too much to care, but I've seen even expert skippers break a sweat as they attempt to ram through the crowded waterways. I know these waterways well. My father and mother made money on the weekends selling roasted corn to boatgoers. In their small rowboat, they would pull alongside the trajineras, my father steering and my mother cooking the corn over a small gas stove. To this day, I can't smell the sweet aroma of corn over a fire without envisioning the dark water and bright boats of Xochimilco. I went along with my parents, but I was never allowed to help sell the corn. Instead, I would hop from boat to boat, pretending I was a frog and the boats were my lily pads. From afar, I'd see anniversary parties and quinceañera celebrations underway and targeted those boats. People celebrating were typically happy to share a piece of cake or empanada with a little boy, especially one with good manners and a nice smile. My parents would tie up the rowboat at the end of the weekend. They never went to Xochimilco during the week, since there wouldn't be any boat parties taking place then. No parties, no one to buy corn, no money. Me, though, I used to love Xochimilco during the weekdays. In the summers, when school was out, I would steal down to the canals on the metro in the early morning. Fog would cover the river like a sheet and obscure the few other boats that were out. Rowing around, you felt as though the water was yours alone. Stray dogs congregated along the canal banks to bark at passers-by, but they were too scared to dive into the water. Brown and gray salamanders danced in the mud. Women who came down from their houses to the water's edge to plant their gardens would stare, wondering what a 9-year-old boy was doing in a boat alone. I was the king of the canals on those mornings. Eventually, I stopped visiting Xochimilco. Often childhood pleasures and habits fade and are replaced. But Xochimilco was taken from me far more suddenly. My last morning trip to the canals began like any other. I said goodbye to my parents, who were leaving for their respective offices, and made myself breakfast. I hopped on the metro and headed south. I remember the book I brought with me that day, a thin tome of Pablo Neruda poems that I was meant to read over the summer for my new classes in the fall. I arrived at the canals and untied the boat. It was only 8 a.m., and there really was no one else on the water. The fog drifted across the banks in the way I liked, in a way Neruda might have written about, had he been there. I let myself drift, lying back in the boat to gaze up at the sky. That was when the sounds began. Soft cries. There were birds on the canal, herons and egrets that could sound eerily human. I paused, muscles tensed to listen more carefully. The cry came again. This time, I was sure that they weren't being issued by a bird. I became aware that I was all alone in a remote part of Xochimilco. The solitude that had seemed such a boon a few minutes before was now deeply distressing. The cry came again. I put down my book slowly so that I did not make a sound and peered over the edge of the boat. There was something in the bushes, something alive and moving. The noise came again, this time ragged, as though the creature making it was having difficulty breathing. I looked more closely and saw the bushes rustle. 2 eyes looked out at me, wild and ferocious. There was a long, guttural growl. Now I knew the sounds hadn't been of a human or a bird. They were feline, and the animal sounded large. I caught a gleam of white teeth, and my heart began to race. I pushed my boat off as quickly as possible, trying furiously to get back to land. What could it have been? There weren't jaguars in Mexico City anymore. I arrived at shore and got on the first metro back to the city. That night at dinner, my mother remarked to my dad, "Did you hear that two panthers escaped from the zoo? They're still searching for them." As soon as I heard the words, I felt relief. I wasn't crazy. A few days later, officials found the panthers. No one was hurt but a few dogs. The panthers had gotten hungry. I knew it was safe to return to the canals, but I somehow couldn't bring myself to go back. Anytime I thought about it, I felt the cold sweat on my skin. To this day, Neruda's poems, even the ones about desperate heartache, made me think of feral cats.